Hello everybody, and welcome back to the channel. For those of you who don't know, my name is Leo, and I will be your humble hillbilly host for the day. I have a little tale to tell you guys that I think you'll probably find pretty interesting. Now, while this site where I've chosen to tell you this tale may seem to be a little bit strange on the surface, a graveyard, I think you'll see the tie-in here in about a minute, and I think you'll agree with me that this is probably the ideal spot to tell you guys this story. You see, today, while I'm sitting here in the peace and quiet of the Appalachian Mountains, I'm going to tell you a really interesting and somewhat traumatizing story of a little known person that lived in Gettysburg during the Civil War. She was called the Angel of Gettysburg, and today we're going to tell you her story. Born in 1832 in Germany, Elizabeth immigrated with her parents, John and Catherine Masser, to the United States when she was in her early 20s. They arrived in New York and realized that their luggage had been stolen. Luckily for them, they ran into a helpful stranger named Peter Thorn. Now, Peter Thorn, who was heading to Pennsylvania, offered to help relocate the family there, and with no firm plans, they accepted. The chance encounter sparked a romance between Peter and Elizabeth, who were married in 1855, and early the next year he accepted a position as the caretaker of a brand new civilian cemetery in Gettysburg, just above the Pennsylvania border with Maryland. The Thorns lived with Elizabeth's parents in the cemetery's gatehouse and were building a good life for themselves, growing their family and establishing roots in the area. When the Civil War broke out at Fort Sumter in South Carolina on April 12th in 1861, Peter, believing the skirmish would be resolved in no time, didn't join the Union military right away. Nearly a year and a half after the war's first shots went by before he finally joined the 138th Pennsylvania Infantry. At home, raising 3 young boys and trying to match their endless energy, Elizabeth had just started the 3rd trimester of pregnancy. The war was undoubtedly a big concern in their lives, but it had never approached their doorstep until one day when the Confederate soldiers stormed through town on June 26th in 1863. After the hungry soldiers told Elizabeth that they had no intention of harming her family, her mother heeded their request and fed them in. The rebels left the next day, but not before they destroyed bridges, railroads, and telegraph lines. Everywhere, they destroyed everything that they could. Thorn said in her recollections published on CivilWarTalk.com on July 1st, the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg, the Confederates drove the Union forces into the direction of Cemetery Hill, right where Elizabeth's family lived. That night, Major General Oliver Howard, along with fellow corps commanders of the Army of the Potomac, Generals Daniel Sickles and Henry Slocum, came to the house, and before they left, they warned Elizabeth that there would be intense fighting the very next day, and that she and her family should leave the house and get as far away in 10 minutes as possible. Take nothing but the children and go. The next day, the Thorns departed and rested that first night at a farmhouse surrounded by a group of Union soldiers. They soon relocated to another farm where the family ate for the first time in 24 hours. A very welcome relief for all of them, but especially for the expectant Elizabeth. The fighting at Gettysburg ended on July 3rd, leaving behind a whole new level of carnage that the country had never seen before. 3,155 Union soldiers and 3,903 Confederate troops were dead, plus a combined 33,264 more wounded. Numbers unseen in any other Civil War engagement. When Elizabeth returned to her home on Evergreen Cemetery on July 7th, her initial reaction upon seeing the gatehouse was simply, "Oh my." A somewhat muted response given what she was staring at the time. The home had been ransacked. Nearly all of their furniture was gone. Shattered windows left shards of glass everywhere. The water pump was broken, and blood and dirt ruined their beds, on which soldiers' arms and legs had been amputated. Wherever Elizabeth stepped, she could not escape the dead because they were everywhere. 4 days after returning home, she was visited by the president of the Cemetery Association, who was more or less her boss, who told her all of those graves needed to be dug immediately. Elizabeth, who became known as the Angel of Gettysburg, started her macabre and laborious task, aided only by her elderly father and, for a short time, 2 Union soldiers, until the stench of the dead caused both of them to quit. Elizabeth, on the other hand, couldn't just walk away and quit. It was her home, it was her job, and it was her responsibility. Elizabeth wore the exact same dress for 6 weeks as she and her father dug graves for 91 soldiers and 14 civilians. Elizabeth delivered her 4th child, Rose, on November 1st in 1863. It was a joyous event, followed by years of the young girl struggling with her health. After mourning the loss of young Rose, who died when she was only 14, the Thorns went on to have 5 more children. Shortly after Rose's birth, the Gettysburg Soldiers National Cemetery was dedicated. 25 of the soldiers that Elizabeth buried there were later relocated. At that very cemetery, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his famous Gettysburg Address, saying in part, "The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. The contributions made by Elizabeth, who died in 1907, have not been forgotten." In 2002, the Gettysburg Women's Civil War Memorial was established, with a sculpture of Elizabeth near the Evergreen Cemetery gatehouse. With her head bowed and a shovel tucked under one arm, she is wiping sweat from her brow while wearing a full-length dress. We hope to one day get to see this location in person, but I suppose for today, this little spot will just have to do. You can somewhere rest in peace, Elizabeth, because your legend lives on. I brought you up here to tell you the story of the graveyard for a reason. Any of you who've ever dug a grave, and I've dug probably a dozen, including Mom's, you know how hard it is to dig just one grave. Now imagine your responsibility is to dig all of those graves for these Civil War soldiers and civilians. Quite a remarkable woman, don't you think? And I think that this is the ideal spot to tell her story among the dead. Anyway, guys, thank y'all for coming along. Thank you for listening to our little story today. We sure appreciate you. We appreciate your support. And with your continued support, we will continue to bring you all of these amazing stories that we can. So, until the next time, guys, keep Elizabeth in your prayers for a minute. And we will see you guys next time on the Hillbilly Files. Leo out.